If someone had told me a year ago that I'd end up marrying James Walker, one of the most powerful men in New York, I would have laughed in their face. James wasn't just powerful, was the kind of man who made people lower their voices when he walked into a room, who could freeze a whole boardroom with a single look, who in public seemed so composed, refined, and almost monk-like in his restraint. But behind closed doors, let's just say the man had a very different definition of self-control. I found out the hard way literally after one night of complete chaos that started with me being in the wrong place at the wrong time, a snowstorm, and a little too much spiked champagne. I remember that night like it's burned into my skin. The city had just seen its first snow, the streets slick and glistening under the streetlights, and I had stupidly worn heels. The moment I stepped out of the bar, my foot slipped, and, before I could hit the ground, James's arms were around me, solid and unyielding. He didn't even let me protest before carrying me straight to his Bentley, the heat in the back seat cranked up, the partition rolled up to give us privacy. I was warm, dizzy, and, God help me, far too aware of the man sitting next to meth, broad shoulders under his suit jacket, the faint mix of smoke and cedar clinging to him, the sharp line of his jaw when he glanced my way. Maybe it was the drink, maybe it was him. Maybe it was both, but my body was on fire, my skin prickling as if there were sparks in the air. James tried to keep it together, muttering about taking me to the hospital, but I wasn't having it. I didn't want a doctor. I wanted him. James, I'd whispered, leaning closer, are you really going to just watch me suffer like this? He'd gone still, his jaw tightening, his gaze darkening until I thought I might drown in it. He told me to put my clothes back on. I told him maybe he wasn't as much of a man as people thought. That was the last coherent thing I remembered before his lips were on mine, and the entire world narrowed down to heat, breath, and the sound of my heart pounding in my ears. 3 days later, I was avoiding him like the plague, but James Walker is not a man you can hide from. He found me, told me he'd take responsibility, and said we should get married. And like the fool I was back then, I agreed. I told myself it was romantic. My teenage daydreams come to life. I was marrying the man who could make my heart race with just one look. That was enough for me, or so I thought. We got married quickly in a lavish wedding, no big announcement. He brought me home to meet his family, and I realized almost immediately they didn't approve of me. I was too ordinary, too plain, a nobody from a single-parent family who had somehow stumbled into the spotlight of New York's elite. But I was young, stubborn, and hopelessly smitten. I thought as long as James treated me well, nothing else mattered. For a while, that seemed true. We had a marriage that looked perfect from the outset, late-night talks, shared dinners, and nights in bed where he seemed insatiable. He never told me he loved me, but he touched me like he did, and I convinced myself that was enough. Until the night of our one-year anniversary. It was supposed to be special. I'd been waiting for him all day, dressed in a new silk slip, candles lit, wine ready. But by 5:30, when I called his phone, it went straight to voicemail. His secretary told me his schedule was confidential. I called 17 times. No answer. Then my phone buzzed with a message from Chloe, his younger cousin, the one who always looked at me like I'd stolen something that belonged to her. Want to know who my cousin's real love is? She texted, with a location pin attached. I should have ignored her. Instead, I grabbed my coat and drove across the city. Chloe was waiting outside a private suite in an upscale Manhattan restaurant. She smirked when she saw me and pushed the door open. The noise inside dulled to a hush, and my eyes locked instantly on the woman at the head of the table. Vanessa Blake. I'd heard her name before James's so-called first love, the woman he'd liked when he was younger, who'd recently divorced and returned to the city. She looked me over, smiling faintly, but there was nothing warm in her gaze. So, you're the little wife, she said, drawing out the words like they were something she was testing on her tongue. Chloe jumped in before I could answer. Vanessa, doesn't she kind of look like you? Vanessa gave me a slow once-over, then laughed softly. If she looks even a little like me, I suppose that's her good luck. Laughter rippled through the room. Chloe's the loudest. I stood there, frozen, humiliated, my hands clenching at my sides. When's James getting here? Chloe asked Vanessa, who picked up her phone, dialed, and me heart stopped actually reached him. James, when are you coming? Everyone's waiting, she cooed, then glanced at me with a glimmer of triumph. Drive safe. See you soon. I couldn't breathe. I turned and left before she could say anything else, the icy night air hitting my face like knives. I didn't remember the drive home, only the way my hands shook as I stood in front of the mirror later that night, taking in the reflection of a woman who suddenly didn't know where she belonged in her own marriage. Vanessa had single eyelids. I had doubles. But we both had the same round eyes, the same little beauty mark at the corner. I hated that I'd noticed. I hated more that it made me wonder if I'd been nothing more than a stand-in from the start. By dawn, I'd made my decision. I slipped off my wedding ring, drafted a divorce agreement, and sealed them both in an envelope with a note. Your skills are overrated. 365 days and you only know one move. I'm bored. 1 star. I want a refund. Then I called a courier and had it sent to the Walker Group's headquarters. I packed my things, called my best friend Sophie, and left. I didn't even wait to see if he'd respond. I didn't wait around to see how James would react to the ring, the divorce agreement, or my 1-star review. I crashed on Sophie's couch, stared at her popcorn ceiling until my eyes burned, and told myself I wasn't going to cry over a man who couldn't bother to show up on our anniversary. But tears have their own agenda, and mine clocked in on the hour like they were getting paid. By the second night, Sophie strong-armed me out of the apartment because grief looks better under neon, so she took me to a new place in Lower Manhattan where the music thumped like a second heartbeat and everyone pretended 2 a.m. was a reasonable time to start over. I wore a dress that didn't feel like me and boots that did, kept my hair down to hide the puffiness around my eyes, and promised I'd sip something weak and leave before I said anything I couldn't take back. It was going fine until a familiar voice cut through the bass, Emily, and I turned to find Daniel Brooks, my college senior, the one who used to edit my resumes and remind me to eat before exams, standing there with that clean, steady smile that had comfort built into it. He looked almost exactly the same except sharper, older, more sure of himself, and for a second my chest loosened, because some people are walking proof that simpler versions of you once existed. We were halfway through a catch-up, him asking if I'd been writing, me lying that I'd been busy and not married to a man who doesn't know how to pick up a phone, when Sophie's eyes went huge and she started fanning the air like she'd seen a celebrity. Then she flicked her gaze past my shoulder, and I didn't need to turn to know James Walker had found me. The air around us shifted the way it does when a storm rolls in. I felt it before I saw him, 6'2" in a black coat and darker stare. And the bar might as well have dimmed the lights just for him. He didn't make a scene, James never has to. He just exists, and the scene makes itself cross the room with that unfussed, controlled stride that says he's already decided how the next 10 minutes of your life are going to go. His gaze skated over Daniel's hand on the back of my chair, then to the neckline of my dress, then to my face, and lingered there long enough to make me mad at my own pulse. We're leaving, he said, low and even, like an instruction not up for debate. And instinct had me bristle, but my voice came out thinner than I wanted when I answered, we are not, because the last time I'd seen him he'd been a ghost behind a dead phone and a location pin that led me straight into a room where another woman smiled like she was doing me a favor by acknowledging I existed. Daniel, bless him, didn't back down. He told James the first didn't look like I wanted to go anywhere. And James gave him a glance so disinterested it bordered on rude before returning his attention to me, Emily, outside. Now, the words weren't loud, but they threaded under my skin. I hated that my feet thought about obeying before my brain did. I hated that all the rehearsed speeches I'd prepared for this moment scattered like dandelion fluff the second we were face to face. I hated most that I still wanted answers from him more than I wanted distance. I stood, because I needed those answers and because Sophie's warning look said, go hear him out then come back and I'll call the cops if I have to, and I let him guide me out by the elbow, not gently but not cruelly either, just with that controlled urgency that says we're going to do this conversation his way or we're going to stand here all night freezing. The wind outside cut through my coat and made my eyes water, which was convenient, because I was already close. "You sent a courier to my office," he said as soon as the door shut behind us, his breath a pale cloud in the December air, with a ring, a contract, and commentary, and the way he paused. On commentary should have been funny if I wasn't so tired. "You were unreachable on our anniversary," I said, keeping my voice steady by a thread. "Your cousin sent me to a private suite where Vanessa Blake answered your call, told you to drive safe. Said she'd see you soon, and you expect me to smile, light candles, and wait until you feel like explaining." His jaw tightened at Vanessa's name, and for once I didn't flinch. "I was in back-to-back meetings," he said. "I was not with Vanessa, and—" The calm in his tone read like insult, like the truth should be self-evident because he declared it. "Your phone was off," I shot back, "which is convenient if you don't want to be found." "My phone died," he said, maddeningly reasonable. "I told my assistant to lock my schedule. You know that happens when we're negotiating. What you walked into was a performance staged for you." The words hit like sleet, stinging then melting into doubt I didn't want to feel. By whom? For what? I asked, and he cut the air with a look. "We'll get there," he said, "but not on a sidewalk at 2 a.m. with your friend watching from the window and that guy ready to play white knight." I almost laughed, humorless. "Sharp, his name is Daniel," I said. "And he's been more of a friend to me in 10 minutes than you were in the last 24 hours. His eyes iced. "You're my wife," he said, even, clipped, like a legal fact instead of a promise, and that more than the cold, more than the exhaustion made my spine go straight. "Then act like it," I told him, "or sign the papers." He stared at me a beat too long, like he was cataloging each word and deciding which one to destroy first. Then he exhaled, the cloud of it white and fleeting. "Get in the car," he said, less command now, more tired request. "We'll talk where it's warm." I wanted to refuse on principle, but my fingers were numb and the adrenaline was wearing off. So I climbed in and kept my back pressed to the seat like distance could be measured in inches. The partition slid up, the heater kicked on, and he looked at my hands red, shaking before shrugging out of his coat and draping it over my lap, without asking. The scent of him smoke, cedar. The faintest trace of my favorite laundry detergent because I'm the one who buys it curled around me and I wanted to be angrier than I was. "You don't get to do the small nice things and skip the big honest ones," I said, and he nodded once, like he'd expected that line. "Then let's start with honest," he said. "Chloe has always wanted you gone." The bluntness of it made me blink. "Vanessa has always known how to use people like Chloe," he went on, "and a few board members are easily dazzled by an old name with a new sob story. They think aligning with her opens doors, and she knows I won't give her leverage, so she created an illusion and fed it to you." I stared at him, skeptical and exhausted in equal measure. "You expect me to believe your cousin and your ex teamed up to ruin my anniversary for sport?" He didn't blink. "I expect you to believe that I wouldn't miss our anniversary unless something mattered more than dinner, and no one matters more than my company when it's under threat," he said, and then I laughed. "That painful little sound that escapes when you've got nothing left." "There it is," I said. The truth finally showed up. "Walker Group first, your wife somewhere after the quarterly earnings call." He flinched, minuscule but real. Then he smoothed it away. "I should have called," he said. "I should have found a phone, a charger, a messenger pigeon, anything, I know." The admission put a hairline crack through my anger, and I hated it for being human. He drove me to my building without touching me again, walked me up, and waited while I fumbled my keys. "I'm not signing tomorrow," I told him in the doorway, "not because I've forgiven you, but because I'm not going to make a decision this big while I'm this tired." He studied me, like I was both problem and solution, then nodded once. "Sleep," he said. "I'll see you tomorrow, meetings," and when he left I locked the door, slid to the floor, and slept for the first time in days. The morning reminded me I was still a body. Fever hit like a truck, throat on fire, the kind of ache that makes you feel like a badly set bone. Sophie tried to force soup on me, and when that failed she forced me into an Uber with a lecture about urgent care. Instead, I told the driver to take me to Walker Group because if I didn't get the paperwork moving now I'd lose my nerve. I wrapped myself in a puffer, a hat, and a scarf and still shivered all the way up the private elevator to the 27th floor. James's office was too bright, too warm. To him in a white shirt I always liked because it made him look less like winter and more like a possibility. His eyes flicked up, took in my flushed cheeks and glassy eyes, and he didn't say "I told you to rest." He picked up the phone and called the company physician. I mumbled that I'd already taken meds, and he said it wasn't enough, which somehow translated into me on the leather sofa with a blanket over my legs and a bottle of water in my hand while we waited. "Before the doctor gets here," I said, stubborn through the haze, "we settle Machi." That earned the briefest break in his composure. "You're negotiating custody of a dog while running a fever," he said, almost fond, almost exasperated. And I pointed at the contract he'd annotated, where he'd circled Machi's name like a shareholder dispute. "He's mine," I said. "You gifted him to me. You don't get to rescind a gift, because you're not the one who feeds him at 3 a.m. When he forgets he's not a puppy." James's mouth tugged to the side, then flattened. "If we divorce," he said carefully, "I'm not letting you walk out of my life with the only loyal creature in it." "Then maybe don't make yourself the least loyal one," I shot back. Which is when the door opened and of course Vanessa Blake glided in, cream coat, matching beret, the kind of composed prettiness that photographs, well, and apologies don't stick to. Her eyes flicked from me to James and back like she'd misread the scene and didn't like the new script. "I might be early," she said, sweet, poised. "We can review the international partnership in the other room if now is a bad time." She added my least favorite smile to the end of the sentence, and I tasted metal. "Great," I said before James could speak. "While you're reviewing, maybe you can also explain why the night of my anniversary you called my husband and told him to drive safe. See you soon." Her face blanched so fast it was almost impressive. "I think you've misunderstood," she tried, the vowels soft with sympathy that felt like contempt, and I pulled out my phone with hands that shook, not from fear this time, but from fever, fury, and a tiny bit of theater. I hit play on a recording Chloe didn't know I had from that private suite. Vanessa calling James, cooing into the phone, Chloe's chirping in the background, and watched the color drain from Vanessa's face like someone had pulled a plug. "Audio can be faked," she snapped. "Quick recovery. And frankly, this is tacky." "Screenshots aren't," I said, thumbing to the thread where Chloe all but drafted the captions for Vanessa's coy little sunrise post. "And witnesses definitely aren't. Should I invite your favorite cousin up for a live Q&A?" I didn't look at James while I said it. I didn't have to. The temperature in the room dropped a few degrees that had nothing to do with my fever. "Enough," he said. "Not to me." And for the first time since the anniversary there was an edge under the control. Like steel catching light. Vanessa swallowed, turned her smile on him. "James, we can discuss the deal later," she murmured. "We wouldn't want personal matters to cloud professional judgment." And I almost laughed again because the audacity really does have gym membership and stamina. "Personal matters walked themselves into my office," he said, the politeness sharpened to a point. "You can wait next door." She hesitated just long enough to look small, then left, the door closing with a hush that sounded like an opportunity. I sank back against the couch and coughed until my eyes watered, and when I could breathe again I said, "Horse, I wasn't going to show up here, I swear I wasn't." But then she posted an icky little sermon about being there is worth more than diamonds at 6 in the morning, and I thought, if you can bring warm porridge to some woman at dawn, you can sign a piece of paper at 10. His mouth went flat. "That post wasn't about me," he said. And I didn't see it until after 2 board members texted me screenshots. "Congratulations," I said. "You and I have the same toxic group chat." He stared at me a long beat, then said, softer than I expected, "If you needed me to say I chose you, you could have asked." I stared right back. "If you needed me to believe you, you could have shown up." We left it there because the door clicked and the doctor came in with a tote of supplies and sensible shoes that said she'd seen worse. She checked my temp, clucked at the number, and offered an 4. I turned down on stubborn principle. We compromised on meds I could keep down, and when she left James picked up the contract again, slid it across, and tapped the circled name. "Machi stays with you," he said. Just like that, no price, no leverage, and the relief that flooded me was embarrassingly big for a creature who eats socks. "But," he added, and there it was, "we're not signing anything today." I opened my mouth to argue, and he raised a hand. Not until we clear the smoke, Vanessa blew. Not until Chloe understands consequences. Not until you and I sit in a room without an audience and put everything on the table. I watched him, trying to decide if this was another angle or the first real offer. He'd made me in weeks. My head throbbed in time with the building's heating system, and the city leaned against the windows like a tired animal. You have 48 hours, I said, because deadlines are the only language men like James speak fluently. Clean it up. Tell me the truth, all of it, no spin, and if at the end I still feel like a placeholder in my own marriage. We go to the clerk and sign like adults. His gaze held mine, steady, level, something a little reckless sparking there. Like he was about to wager the house. Deal, he said, and when he walked me to the elevator, I didn't let him touch me, didn't lean into the warmth that always tempted me to forget. But I also didn't look back to see if Vanessa had the nerve to meet my eyes in the corridor. I went home, slept hard, woke to a phone vibrating off the nightstand, texts from Sophie, missed calls from Daniel, and a single, terse message from James. Start at noon. No audience, and I didn't reply, but I didn't block him either, because part of Metroidorus, hopeful, angry, wanted to know WC. By the time noon rolled around, I'd convinced myself that walking into James Walker's apartment was a mistake. But I went anyway, because apparently I'm a glutton for punishment, and because a part of me needed to see if 48 hours in James's hands would actually mean anything. His penthouse was exactly as I remembered: high ceilings, floor-to-ceiling windows, spilling light across furniture that probably had names and designers I couldn't pronounce. The faint scent of his cologne lingering in the air like it belonged there as much as he died was waiting in the living room. Not behind a desk, not on a phone. Just standing there with that unreadable expression that made me feel both wanted and interrogated at the same time. You're on time, he said, like it surprised him, and I ignored that, tossing my scarf on the arm of the couch and folding my arms because I needed the armor. You said no audience, I reminded him, and he gestured toward the sofa like we were about to have a civil conversation over tea instead of dissecting the last year of our marriage. I handled Chloe, he began. And my eyebrows went up because that was quick even for him. She won't be interfering again. She's been shipped off to a development project overseas where her phone will have more dust than signal, and she's been told in no uncertain terms that any further meddling will cut her off entirely. I blinked, equal parts impressed and wary. And Vanessa? I asked, my tone sharper than I meant. Facing a lawsuit for misrepresentation and fraud. He said without flinching. Several people came forward with statements about her trying to use my name to secure deals, including her own assistant. Turns out loyalty can be bought, and she wasn't the highest bidder. I stared at him, trying to gauge if this was damage control or actual honesty. So you're telling me she just manufactured that scene for fun? I pressed, and he leaned back, watching me with that cool steadiness. For leverage, he corrected, because if you left, she thought it would weaken me, make me more likely to agree to a partnership on her terms. I let out a humorless laugh. Congratulations. It almost worked. My voice cracked on the last word, and I hated it, hated giving him even a fraction of my hurt. He moved like he wanted to come closer, then stopped himself. Emily, I didn't marry you because of one night, he said. The words slow, deliberate, like he wanted me to feel every syllable. I married you because you walked into my life and refused to treat me like a headline or a bank account, because you make me feel. He trailed off. And that hesitation was almost worse than silence. Feel what? I asked, my pulse jumping, and he shook his head slightly. Alive. The word was quiet, but it hit hard, harder than I wanted it to, because for all the ways James infuriated me, I'd never doubted he meant what he said when he finally decided to say it. You could have told me that before I packed up my life. I shot back, and he exhaled. You could have asked before assuming the worst, and there it was again, that push-pull that made us crash into each other instead of meeting in the middle. Do you have any idea what it's like, I said, my voice low but shaking, to sit alone on the night of your anniversary, calling a man 17 times and get nothing back but silence, only to have another woman answer the call I couldn't get through? His jaw tightened, his eyes darkening. Do you have any idea what it's like, he countered, to walk into a bar and see your wife leaning into another man? I stared at him, stunned. Daniel is my friend, I snapped. He's been in my life since college, and I have never once given him a reason to think it was anything more. Can you say the same about Vanessa? The silence that followed was heavy, thick. The kind that makes you aware of your own breathing. No, he admitted finally, and the truth of it landed between us like a truce neither of us wanted to offer. We sat there for a long moment, the city noise muted by the glass, until he said, I don't want a divorce, and my throat tightened because part of me didn't either. But pride is a stubborn thing. You don't get to decide that alone. I reminded him, and he nodded. Then tell me what it takes. The directness in his tone made my stomach twist. Trust, I said without thinking, and not the kind you buy with grand gestures or punish with silence. Actual trust, where I don't have to wonder if I'm the only one in the room when I'm standing right next to you. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, eyes locked on mine. Then start wondering less, he said, and I almost laughed, because of course he'd make it sound that simple. It's not a switch, James, I said. You can't just tell me to stop feeling something and expect it to happen. Then let me prove it to you, he countered, and there was that spark again, the one that told me James Walker didn't fight battles he didn't intend to win. 48 hours isn't a lifetime, I warned, but it's enough to show me if you mean any of this. His mouth curved just slightly, but it wasn't smug. It was more like he was bracing for impact. Then we start now, he said. Standing and holding out his hand, I hesitated, staring at it like it might bite. Then finally let him pull me up, his grip warm, steady, too familiar for the walls I was trying to rebuild. We're going somewhere, he said, already grabbing his coat. And I opened my mouth to protest, but he was steering me toward the elevator before I could form the words. Where? I demanded, and he glanced at me. Someplace where the noise can't follow us. Cryptic, infuriating, and exactly the kind of thing that kept me hooked against my better judgment. The ride down was quiet, the air charged. And when we stepped out into the garage, his driver was already waiting, door open, heat spilling from the car into the cold. You're not telling me, are you? I said as we slid in, and he shook his head. You'll see, I hate surprises, but with James, they always came wrapped in equal parts danger and allure. The city blurred past, the skyline giving way to quieter streets until we pulled up in front of a townhouse I didn't recognize. This is mine, he said simply, and I blinked. You have another place? Had, he corrected. I bought it before we met, kept it because I didn't know what I'd do with it. Now I think it's time you decide. Confusion must have been all over my face because he added, You've said you never felt like our home was this one can be. The words caught me off guard. You can't buy trust with real estate, I said, but it came out softer than I meant. I'm not trying to buy it, he replied. I'm trying to give you space that's yours, without my family's opinions or anyone else's shadow hanging over it. I stepped inside, and the warmth hit me first, then the smell, fresh paint, polished wood, something faintly floral like the candles I used to burn in my old apartment. You did this in 48 hours? I asked, and he gave a half shrug. Less, actually. I walked through the rooms, each one filled with little details that felt like me, not us, not him, and it scared me more than I wanted to admit, because it meant he'd been paying attention all along. When I came back to the living room, he was leaning against the doorframe, watching me. This is a good start, I said, and his mouth twitched. Then I'll keep going, he said, and I should have been annoyed at his confidence, but instead I felt that dangerous pull again, the one that made me want to believe him. I didn't move into the townhouse that night, not because I didn't like it, God. I loved it, but because moving in felt like crossing a line I wasn't sure I was ready for. So I told James the first needed time, and he didn't argue, just handed me the keys like he knew I'd find my way back when I was ready. Over the next couple of days, he kept his word about cleaning up the mess. I watched from the sidelines as Chloe vanished from the city's social scene overnight. Her Instagram suddenly all photos of some dusty construction site overseas with captions about new beginnings, which was James speak for I've made you someone else's problem. And Vanessa? She went quiet too, her name popping up only in whispers at charity events, rumors about a lawsuit floating just loud enough for me to hear without James ever bragging about it. He wasn't performing, he was just fixing, and that scared me in a different way. Because it meant he'd always been capable of this, he just hadn't chosen to before. Still, Trust doesn't magically regenerate because a man does damage control, so I kept my distance, stayed at Sophie's, focused on work, tried to ignore the fact that every night around 9 my phone would buzz with a simple home from him, and I'd stare at it too long before typing not yet. The thing is, when you've been hurt, safety feels like distance. But distance also starts to feel like loneliness if you let it stretch too long. Sophie finally snapped one Friday night, dragging me out for hot pot to feed the sadness out of you, and for a while at work we laughed, we gossiped. I forgot, but then in the middle of the meal, my phone lit up with a name I still hadn't deleted, James Walker. I hesitated, didn't answer, and Sophie gave me that look like she knew I wanted to. If you're going to keep dodging him, at least be consistent, she said, and I rolled my eyes, muttering something about consistency being overrated. The next day, I caved, not in the way you'd expect. I didn't go to him. I went to the townhouse, alone, early morning when the city was still quiet. I walked through those rooms again, and it felt like they'd been waiting for me. Every throw pillow, every shelf, every corner whispering you belong here, and that's when I realized maybe I wasn't afraid of trusting him again. Maybe I was afraid of what it would mean if I did. So I texted him just an address. No words, and 20 minutes later he was there, hair still damp from a shower, white shirt under a charcoal coat, looking like every decision I swore I wouldn't make twice. You're here, he said, like he needed to confirm it, and I nodded. You said this place could be mine, I reminded him, and something in his expression softened. It's yours, he said simply, no conditions, no contract, and just like that I felt the fight go out of me a little. I'm not saying we're fixed, I warned, but this is something. It's a start, he agreed, and for the first time in weeks I believed him. We spent the afternoon there, not talking about the past, not making promises about the future, just existing in the same space without the tension pressing down. It was almost normal, almost easy, and when he left that evening he didn't ask me to come with him, just kissed my forehead like it was the most natural thing in the world, the kind of thing you do when you know someone will still be there tomorrow. But peace with James never lasts long, and 2 days later I found myself face to face with Vanessa Blake again. This time not in some dimly lit private room, but in the middle of the Walker Group lobby. I was on my way to drop off some papers for a client when the elevator doors opened, and there she was, cream dress, perfect waves, eyes narrowing just enough to let me know she'd seen me. Emily, she said, like we were old friends bumping into each other at brunch. I hear congratulations are in order. You've got your own little place now. My jaw tightened. Funny, I didn't realize you kept up with my living arrangements. Well, when they're gifted by someone like James, people notice, she replied. Her tone sugar, but her eyes sharp. You must be very persuasive. I almost laughed. Or maybe he just likes me more than you think. Her smile flickered, just for a second, but it was enough. Be careful, she said finally, leaning in like she was sharing a secret. Men like James always remember their first love. I met her gaze dead on. Good thing I'm his last, I said, and stepped past her before she could see the way my heart was racing. Later, when I told James about it, he didn't look surprised. She's trying to get under your skin, he said. Don't let her. That's easy for you to say, I shot back. You're not the one she's implying is just a stand-in. His eyes went cold. You are not a stand-in, he said, the words clipped, final. And I realized he was more insulted by the idea than I was. Still, Vanessa's little dig worked its way into my head, and that night I found myself lying awake in the townhouse, wondering if a man like James, who could have anyone, who had history with someone like her, would really choose me forever. The next morning he showed up without warning, holding coffee and a bag of my favorite pastries. Get dressed, he said. We're going out. Where? I asked, but he was already heading toward the kitchen to set things down. Someplace where you'll get your answer, he said, and something in his tone made me follow without arguing. The someplace turned out to be a small art gallery in Chelsea. The kind of place that doesn't advertise because it doesn't have to. He walked me straight to a wall where a new series was hanging photographs of the city at night, moody and beautiful, each one paired with a single portrait, and in the center was me. Not posed, not styled, just me, sitting on our old balcony in sweats, hair in a messy bun, laughing at something out of frame. You took this, I realized, and he nodded. It's my favorite, he said, and when I frowned, confused, he added, because it's you. The way I see you. My throat went tight, the noise of the gallery fading until it was just us. I wanted you to see that you're not competing with anyone, he said, because no one else is you, and damn him, he meant it. I could see it in his face, hear it in the steadiness of his voice, feel it in the way he reached for my hand and didn't let go. Walking out of that gallery, I wasn't naive enough to think all our problems had evaporated, but something in me shifted. The balance tipping away from doubt and toward something scarier happened. I knew if I kept moving in this direction, Part 5 was going to change everything. I left the gallery with my fingers still laced through James's, the cold air biting at my cheeks, but not enough to compete with the warmth radiating from his hand, and for the first time in weeks, maybe months, I didn't feel like I was waiting for the other shoe to drop. Instead, there was this fragile sense of possibility, the kind you're almost afraid to name out loud because you don't want to jinx it. James walked me to the car without rushing, opened the door like it was second nature, and once we were inside, he didn't immediately fill the silence with explanations or promises. He just sat there, watching me, like he was trying to memorize this exact moment. What? I finally asked, half smiling because I couldn't help it. Nothing, he said, but the corner of his mouth curved in that way that made me suspect it was everything. The ride back to the townhouse was quiet in a comfortable way. And when we got there, he didn't push to come inside, just brushed his thumb over my knuckles and told me to rest, like he trusted I'd invite him in when I was ready. It was such a small thing, but it mattered, because James Walker was not a man who liked waiting. And the fact that he was willing to now told me more than any speech could. Still, trust isn't something you rebuild in one grand gesture or even two. It's in the in-between moments, the ones nobody sees. And over the next week, those moments started adding up. Text me in the middle of the day just to ask if I'd eaten. Send a photo of Machi curled up in some ridiculous position on his office couch. Or drop off groceries I'd mention wanting without making a big deal out of it, and I'd catch myself smiling at my phone like some lovesick teenager, which was equal parts pathetic and dangerous, because hope can make you soft, and soft is exactly how people get hurt. I kept telling myself to be cautious, to remember the sting of that night when my calls went unanswered. But then Friday rolled around, and he showed up at the townhouse unannounced, wearing jeans and a sweater instead of his usual armor of suits, holding 2 coffee cups and a paper bag that smelled like the best bagels in Manhattan. I thought we could have breakfast together, he said, like it was the most casual thing in the world, and maybe it was, but when you've been bracing for distance, casual can feel like a luxury. We ate at the kitchen island, talking about nothing and everything: how the Knicks were playing, the neighbors' questionable holiday decorations, Machi's latest attempt to dig through the trash, and it felt so absurdly normal that it almost made my chest ache. Halfway through, he set his coffee down and said, "There's something I want to ask you," which immediately had me suspicious, because nothing good ever comes from that tone. "Before you say no," he added quickly, "hear me out. I want you to come to the Walker Group's annual gala with me next week." I raised an eyebrow. "You mean the gala where your family, your board, and every person who's ever judged me will be in attendance?" "That's the one," he confirmed, unbothered. "Why would I subject myself to that?" I asked, and he leaned forward, his gaze steady. "Because I want them to see exactly who my wife is, and because I'm tired of letting them pretend you don't exist." The sincerity in his voice caught me off guard, and for a second I couldn't think of a single reason to refuse. "You know they're not going to magically like me," I warned, and he shrugged. "They don't have to. They just have to respect you." And that, I realized, was the difference. He wasn't asking me to win them over. He was making it clear he'd handle that part, so I agreed, reluctantly, already dreading the small talk and side eyes, but also strangely curious to see how he'd manage it. The week leading up to the gala passed in a blur of work, Sophie's teasing about your fancy date night, and one too many mental rehearsals of what I'd say if someone made a snide comment. The night of, James arrived at the townhouse in a tux that looked like it had been made for him, probably because it had, and when I stepped out in the gown Sophie had helped me pick, His expression shifted in a way that made my stomach flip. "You're going to ruin my focus tonight," he murmured, offering his arm, and I rolled my eyes but felt heat creep up my neck. The car ride to the venue was a mix of nerves and anticipation, and when we walked in, every head seemed to turn, the buzz of conversation dipping just enough for me to notice. James didn't so much as flinch, guiding me through the crowd with an easy confidence, stopping to greet people but never letting go of my hand, and every time someone's gaze lingered a little too long on me, his thumb would brush against my skin like a silent reminder that I wasn't here alone, of course. It didn't take long for the first thinly veiled insult to Aravian older board member's wife smiling tightly as she remarked how brave I was to wear such a bold color, as if my dress were a personal affront to the event's theme before I could respond. James cut in smoothly, "I think she looks perfect," his tone polite but edged just enough to shut the conversation down, and I realized in that moment he wasn't just standing beside me, he was actively making space for me in a room that would rather pretend I wasn't there. The night went on like that. Little skirmishes I didn't have to fight because he did it for me without turning it into a spectacle, and somewhere between the champagne toast and the last dance, I caught myself leaning into him, laughing at something he said, feeling almost proud to be there with him, which was a dangerous thing to feel because it made me forget for a moment all the reasons I'd kept my guard up. But maybe that's the thing about rebuilding, you have to let yourself forget sometimes. If only to remember what it's like when it's good. When the night finally wound down, we slipped out before the crowd, the city glittering outside the car windows, and James turned to me, his expression softer than I'd seen it in a long time. "You were incredible tonight," he said, and I wanted to deflect, to make a joke, but the truth was it mattered to hear him say it, so I just smiled. "We make a good team," I said, and he nodded. "We always have, and maybe, just maybe." By the time the car pulled up to the townhouse after the gala, my feet were aching and my cheeks hurt from smiling, but there was this quiet satisfaction humming under my skin, the kind that made the exhaustion feel worth it. James got out first and offered his hand like we were still in front of all those people, and I took it even though there was no audience now, maybe because it felt different tonight, less like a performance, more like a choice. Inside, I kicked off my heels and collapsed onto the couch, laughing when Machi trotted over like he'd been left alone for weeks instead of a few hours. James loosened his tie, watching me with that unreadable expression, and I could tell he was trying to decide whether to keep talking or just let the night settle between us. "You handled yourself perfectly tonight," he said finally, and I shrugged. "I had a good bodyguard." "Not a bodyguard," he corrected, moving closer. "Your husband." The word landed heavier than I expected. Maybe because for so long it had felt like just a title, but tonight it had actually meant something. I didn't reply right away, just looked at him, taking in the way his shirt collar was slightly askew, his hair a little mussed. Like the perfect exterior he wore so easily had finally let me peek underneath. "You know," I said slowly, "I'm still mad about what happened, about how easily it all could have been avoided." His jaw tightened, not defensively, but like he was bracing for impact. "I know," he said, "and I'm still sorry. Sorry isn't magic." I reminded him, "It doesn't fix everything. I'm not asking it to," he said, leaning in just enough that I could feel the warmth of him. "I'm asking for time to keep proving that I meant what I said, that you're not a stand-in, that you never were, that you never will be." And maybe it was the champagne still lingering in my system, or the way my walls had been quietly crumbling all week, but I believed him in that moment. Not completely, not without reservations, but enough to let myself want more. "Then keep proving it," I murmured, and his smile was small but real, the kind I almost never saw in public, like it was reserved for me. We didn't talk about Vanessa or Chloe or the anniversary again that night. Instead, we sat on the couch with Machi wedged between us, trading quiet stories about the first time we'd each realized we might actually be in trouble with each other. His was that night in the car when I was tipsy and stubborn and refused to go to the hospital. Mine was the first morning I woke up in his apartment and found coffee already waiting. The conversation was easy, unguarded, the kind that happens when both people are too tired to maintain the usual armor, and by the time we drifted off, my head against his shoulder, I realized I wasn't thinking about leaving anymore. not in the immediate sense. The days after felt different. Not perfectly was still busy. I was still cautious, but there was a steadiness now, little things that built on each other. Like him texting me before a late meeting just to say he'd call after, or me dropping by his office with lunch and not feeling like I was intruding. Sophie noticed it too, teasing me that I'd gone from pending divorce to soft launch. Reconciliation in record time. I told her to mind her business, but the truth was I liked the way it felt, like we were slowly rewriting the story instead of just closing the book. The real test came a month later, when James had to travel for a last-minute deal, the kind of trip that would have made me spiral before. This time, he didn't just tell me the city and the dates. He sent his full itinerary, called every night no matter how late. And even